She stood at the firing range, a quiet woman in her 50s, her unassuming presence drawing smirks from the crowd, until a Navy SEAL commander caught sight of her tattoo and froze, his face paling as if he'd seen a ghost. What secret did her ink hold that left a hardened warrior speechless? Stick around to uncover a tale of hidden pasts, HOA drama, and a community about to be turned upside down. If you love jaw-dropping stories of neighborhood feuds, shocking reveals, and Karens getting their comeuppance, hit that subscribe button, smash the like, and ring the bell so you don't miss a single twist in this wild saga. Let's dive into the chaos. The morning sun beat down on the sprawling lawns of Willow Creek, a gated community where manicured hedges and pristine mailboxes hid simmering tensions. At the center of it all was Ellen Harper, a woman whose plain cardigans and sensible shoes made her the last person anyone expected to stir trouble. She'd moved into the neighborhood 6 months ago, renting a modest 2-story home on Maple Drive, and kept to herself, tending her small garden and avoiding the HOA's relentless meetings. Her quiet demeanor, however, had already sparked whispers among the residents. They called her the Hermit, snickering at her outdated glasses and the way she carried a faded tote bag everywhere. To them, she was a nobody, a bland outsider who didn't belong in their polished enclave. But Ellen didn't care for their approval. She had her reasons for staying under the radar, reasons etched into the skin beneath her sleeve. The trouble began at the annual Willow Creek Community Fair, a self-important affair where residents flaunted their wealth and status under the guise of charity. The event sprawled across the community park with booths for bake sales, face painting, and a makeshift firing range set up by the local gun club. Ellen, who rarely attended such gatherings, showed up that day, her tote bag slung over her shoulder. She lingered at the edge of the crowd, watching children chase balloons while HOA President Karen Whitaker strutted about, her clipboard a scepter of authority. Karen, with her perfectly highlighted hair and designer sunglasses, had already pegged Ellen as an easy target. She'd sent multiple violation notices to Ellen's address, first for a slightly overgrown lawn, then for a mailbox that wasn't the approved shade of beige. Ellen paid the fines without protest, which only emboldened Karen's crusade to make her conform or leave. At the fair, Karen spotted Ellen near the firing range and saw an opportunity. The range was a point of pride for Willow Creek's more macho residents, a place where men like Tom Bradley, a retired car dealer with a loud laugh, showed off their marksmanship. Karen, ever the orchestrator, sidled up to Tom and suggested he challenge Ellen to shoot, knowing the crowd would eat up the spectacle of the hermit fumbling with a gun. Tom, eager for a laugh, called Ellen over, his voice dripping with condescension. The crowd gathered, their smirks barely concealed, expecting a humiliating display. Ellen hesitated, her eyes scanning the faces around her, but something in her expression shifted. Resignation, perhaps, or a flicker of defiance. She stepped forward, rolling up her sleeve to adjust her grip on the offered pistol. That's when the tattoo came into view. A small, intricate design of a trident entwined with a rose, faded but unmistakable. The range fell silent. Tom's grin faltered, and a man standing nearby, a grizzled, broad-shouldered figure in a black cap, froze mid-step. His name was Commander James Callahan, a retired Navy SEAL who'd settled in Willow Creek to escape his past. He'd been watching the scene with mild amusement until Ellen's tattoo caught his eye. His face drained of color, his jaw tightening as if he'd been punched. The trident wasn't just any symbol. It was a mark he'd seen before, decades ago, in a life of covert missions and classified files. To him, it wasn't just ink. It was a signal of something extraordinary, something tied to secrets he'd sworn to bury. Ellen, oblivious to his reaction, took her stance, aimed, and fired. The target shredded, each shot landing with surgical precision. The crowd's laughter died, replaced by stunned murmurs. Karen's clipboard slipped slightly in her grip. Ellen lowered the gun, rolled her sleeve back down, and walked away without a word, leaving the fair in a state of bewildered silence. Back at her house, Ellen sat at her kitchen table, her hands steady but her mind racing. She hadn't meant to draw attention. The tattoo, a relic of a life she'd left behind, was supposed to stay hidden. She'd chosen Willow Creek for its anonymity, a place where she could fade into the background and avoid the ghosts of her past. But the fair had changed things. She could feel the shift in the air, the way eyes lingered on her now. Karen, predictably, was the first to act. By evening, a new violation notice arrived, this time for unauthorized public behavior at the fair. Ellen tossed it into a drawer with the others, knowing Karen's petty power plays were the least of her worries. What unnerved her was the man who'd stared at her tattoo, Callahan. She'd seen the recognition in his eyes, the kind that could unravel everything she'd worked to keep buried. Across the neighborhood, Callahan sat in his study, the lights dim, a glass of whiskey untouched on his desk. The trident rose tattoo haunted him. He'd last seen it in a briefing room, on a file stamped with warnings of national security. The woman it belonged to wasn't just skilled with a gun, she was a legend, a ghost story whispered among operatives. But that woman was supposed to be dead, lost in a mission gone wrong 20 years ago. Callahan had been part of that mission, a young SEAL then, and the guilt of its failure still clung to him. Seeing Ellen, alive and unassuming in a suburban hellscape, shook him to his core. He needed answers, but confronting her risked exposing his own secrets. Willow Creek, with its petty HOA rules and nosy neighbors, was about to become a battleground for truths neither of them wanted unearthed. The next morning, Karen doubled down. She rallied the HOA board, spinning tales of Ellen's dangerous behavior at the fair. The board, a clique of Karen's loyalists, agreed to escalate their campaign. They issued a formal letter demanding Ellen attend a disciplinary hearing, threatening fines or eviction if she refused. The neighborhood buzzed with gossip, residents divided between those who saw Ellen as a threat and those intrigued by her unexpected skill. Callahan, meanwhile, kept his distance, watching Ellen's house from his porch, his mind wrestling with memories of classified operations and a woman who wasn't supposed to exist. Ellen, sensing the storm brewing, began preparing. Not for Karen's petty hearing, but for the possibility that her past was catching up. She checked the locks on her doors, inventoried the small safe hidden beneath her floorboards, and wondered how long she could keep running from a life she'd tried to leave behind. The tension in Willow Creek thickened as the days passed. Karen's crusade against Ellen grew obsessive, her violation notices piling up for absurd infractions. A flower pot placed an inch too close to the sidewalk, a porch light deemed too bright. The neighborhood watched, some with glee, others with unease, as the HOA's grip tightened. Ellen, however, remained a cipher, her calm exterior masking a growing resolve. She knew Callahan's stare meant trouble, and Karen's vendetta was a distraction she couldn't afford. As the disciplinary hearing loomed, Ellen stood at her window, watching the sun set over the perfect lawns of Willow Creek. She'd come here to disappear, but the past, like the tattoo on her arm, refused to stay hidden. The hearing would be more than a bureaucratic nuisance. It would be the spark that set everything ablaze. The disciplinary hearing arrived, a spectacle held in the community center's stuffy meeting room, where Karen presided like a judge in her own kangaroo court. Ellen entered, her tote bag in hand, her face unreadable. The room buzzed with anticipation, residents cramming into folding chairs to witness the showdown. Karen laid out her case, her voice sharp as she listed Ellen's supposed infractions, from her disruptive performance at the fair to her failure to integrate with the community. The board nodded along, their pens scratching out notes while the audience whispered about the mysterious woman who'd outshot the men at the range. Ellen stood silently, her sleeve covering the tattoo that had already caused too much trouble. She knew this wasn't about her lawn or her mailbox. This was Karen's attempt to assert dominance, to break the outsider who dared defy her. But Ellen had faced worse than clipboard-wielding tyrants, and she wasn't here to play their game. Callahan slipped into the back of the room, his presence unnoticed by most, his eyes locked on Ellen, searching for confirmation of the impossible. The tattoo, the shooting, the way she carried herself. It all pointed to a truth he couldn't ignore. He'd spent years convincing himself the woman from that doomed mission was gone. But here she was, standing in a room full of suburbanites, her past a ticking bomb. As Karen's accusations grew louder, Ellen's gaze met Callahan's for a fleeting moment. Neither acknowledged the other, but the air between them crackled with unspoken history. Karen, oblivious to the undercurrent, demanded Ellen explain herself, her tone dripping with triumph. Ellen's response was measured, her words careful, but her presence carried a weight that silenced the room. She didn't deny the charges or beg for leniency. She simply stated she'd comply with the HOA's rules. Her voice steady but laced with something that made Karen's smile falter. The hearing ended with no resolution, only a promise of further action from the board. Ellen left without fanfare, her steps deliberate as she walked back to Maple Drive. The crowd dispersed, their whispers now tinged with unease. Karen, though outwardly smug, felt a flicker of doubt. She'd expected Ellen to crumble, but the woman's calm defiance unnerved her. Callahan, meanwhile, returned to his study, pulling out an old, encrypted phone he hadn't touched in years. He needed to know if Ellen was who he thought she was, but digging into her past meant risking his own exposure. The neighborhood, once a sleepy backdrop for petty squabbles, was now a chessboard where every move carried consequences. Ellen, alone in her kitchen, opened her safe and retrieved a single item, a worn photograph of a younger her, standing beside a team of operatives, the trident rose tattoo fresh on her arm. She knew Callahan's presence wasn't a coincidence, and Karen's vendetta was a distraction she could no longer ignore. As night fell over Willow Creek, the community's facade of perfection began to crack. Ellen's secret, Callahan's guilt, and Karen's obsession were on a collision course. The HOA's next move would push Ellen to a decision: stay hidden or confront the past she'd fought to escape. The quiet woman who'd been mocked at the range was no longer just a neighbor. She was a storm waiting to break, and Willow Creek wasn't ready for what was coming. If you're hooked on this tale of hidden identities, HOA drama, and a showdown brewing in suburbia, smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next chapter. Things are about to get wild. Stay tuned for the chaos.